Tonight we are going to talk about migration within the United States. Now this is something that I have never taught before. My favorite book about the time period when I have needed it the most in my research is Lost, not by me. And so I am feeling that in some ways this isn't going to be as great a lesson as when I listened to the expert teach it at BYU. Education Week, not Education Week, Genealogy Week. But nonetheless, I hope that we can get the overview. It is important to understand, particularly if we are researching in the United States, where our ancestors were and how they got there. An example is a couple of years ago, like 20, my family took a vacation and we traced backwards two of my ancestral families, till we got them to the East Coast. So this particular family, actually the husband and wife married just outside of Philadelphia, where they arrived from Germany. Then they traveled down to North Carolina. From North Carolina, they crossed the Cumberland Gap into Daniel Boone country, married some of the early settlers from Daniel Boone's crossing. Then they went from there to Kentucky. Well, that's in Kentucky. From there to Illinois, from Illinois to Missouri, from Missouri to Kansas, from Kansas to Colorado, and from Colorado to Utah. That is a route different than most people in Utah came from. Actually, my family did not come to Utah until 1970. So it took us 200 years to make this trip from North Carolina to Utah. But that is the migration pattern followed by my ancestors, particularly most of my mother's family. Each of you will also have a migration trail in the United States. You just about have to know history in order to be able to understand this. And so this is another example of how history and genealogy come together. William Dollarhide is one of the foremost teachers of how to research in the United States. He particularly has gathered together the information that you need to know. He has a whole book, maybe more than one book, on how to use the census. Here is the book that he wrote about American migration up to the War of 1812.
What's his name?
His name is William Dollarhide. He does not have a book about 1815 to 1915. That's the book, that's the information that I can't find. Darn it, it was an excellent presentation. My husband wants to know where I got it. I got it from Amazon. So let's talk a little bit about the history of, you know what I have to do? I have to be able to screen share, which means I have to figure out how to do that when this didn't come up.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
I'm wondering if you can tell me what the years were, American migration up to what year?
1735 to 1815. And that's specifically this book. I don't remember what it cost me. It's not very thick. Probably, I think it cost me about $17. And I was very disappointed not to find a book for the 100 years after that, because in my opinion, that's when that's when I've needed it the most, is before colonial times. Now, oh dear, I lost you altogether. I was trying to find out how to share screen. I think I'm gonna have to start all over again by launching my meeting. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just me that's lost. Okay. You know, I think I'm gonna, I don't know how, I don't know where I went. Okay, I bet you're back. Okay. So, does anybody know this well enough to know what to tell me to
Share the screen.
share my screen?
Yeah, I do it at work. On the very bottom, there's a bar, you know, that says mute and stop video. Do you see the one that says share screen?
No, because I don't have the whole page. It doesn't, somehow I only have you on a strip to the side. I don't have the whole screen. If I had the whole screen, I would know where it's at.
You can move our pictures off of, I think you can. You can move your picture somewhere so you can see the bottom of that screen.
Well, I don't know what
Click
happened,
up
but it
there,
worked. Okay,
Up at the top.
it worked.
Okay, now, Rick
So
says-
now you should be able to see my screen. Can you see my screen?
yes, we
Yeah.
can.
Very good. So this is the story. When the colonists first arrived in the United States, they went to the harbor where their boat took them. So the early colonists were all next to the ocean. And they did not move very far inward for quite a while. Okay, now that's a copy of his book.
It's an interesting book, interesting name.
Do you write down map, guys?
Now I'm playing. I have to figure out how to get it to show the rest of the pictures, and I don't think it's going to. So I guess I have to do it one by one. We've already talked about that one. Here's a picture of what the Atlantic coastline looked like when the colonists arrived. And you can see where all of the harbors are.
Chestnuts.
And this is where
Chestnuts.
the communities were. The Baltimore harbor had a lot of people. In Virginia, they had harbors and people were there. Clear down in South Carolina, at Charleston, they had a harbor. In New York and Philadelphia, they had harbors. In Massachusetts, they had harbors. And that's where the people lived. Now, the King of England wanted to make sure that he could send postage from one colony to another. So he designated that they needed to make a postal route. And this postal route was a man on horseback. And one time somebody went with him on his postal route from Boston down to Charleston. And when she got to the end, she said, that's not a trail. I have no idea how he knew where to go. It is nowhere near a road. It is nowhere near a postal road. But the mail carrier knew how to do it. And this was very necessary for getting postage or information to any of the colonies from one colony to another. Most of the time, if somebody needed to go from one colony to another, they took the boat. They very seldom went on land. Now, one of my early ancestral families was in Gloucester, Massachusetts, as sailors in the early days. And I knew that their next generation down lived in Maine. And I knew that Maine at one point in time was considered part of Massachusetts. But so when I finally looked at the map to see how they got there, their they moved to about right there. And the town they moved to was called New Gloucester, Massachusetts. And so, see, they just had barely had to sail just a little ways at all to get from Massachusetts to Maine. But most of our colonial ancestors lived right here in one of these 13 colonies, right against the ocean. Now, the next few generations, so in the 1700s, before the Revolutionary War, here is a map that shows all of the 13 colonies, but now roads have begun to be established in this area. And there's not very many that go west because the Appalachian Mountains go north and south and kept people from going west. Also, a treaty with the Indians took place. And I don't remember the details to give you the correct details, but one road was formed along the treaty agreements at the edge of the mountains, and it was called the Fall Line Road. And then later they made another trail, another road, a little bit further westward, which they called the Upper Road. And it was right at the very edge of the Appalachian Mountains. Then there was a group of two main groups, but others that were in near Philadelphia, which is here, and they wanted to go south. And part of the reason they wanted to go south was Germans discovered that a German family with lots of sons could farm a lot of land. And so they wanted to go someplace where there was more land. And so they went down into North Carolina. And so they took mostly this road called the Great Valley Road. And some of my ancestors did this. They married in Philadelphia, and then they moved down, only they kept coming. They came clear to Salisbury, North Carolina. And those two groups of my family, one was the Michaels, and they were Germans with large families, and the others were the Boones. And although they were mostly kicked out of the Quaker church because their daughter married a non-Quaker, so the whole family got kicked out, the Quakers also took this road down into North Carolina. So that is how my Michael family and my Boone family got to North Carolina. Now, a lot of families followed these same roads, the Upper Road and the Fall Line Road and the Great Valley Road, and they went south. There aren't very many roads going west. If you'll notice, about the only road going west is this one that comes over to Lake Ontario. And I don't know if you remember that in New York, upstate New York, in a place that they called the Finger Lakes District, because here are the 5 lakes that look like fingers. And right here, about here, where my pointer is where the Smith family moved to when they came from Vermont. Now, if you look, there's not a very good road between Vermont and New York. If you've heard the story about Lucy Mack Smith, her husband had gone ahead to New York and had found a place to settle in Palmyra, or near Palmyra. But so she followed later, and she hired a wagon master, a wagoneer, to drive her wagon and get her to Palmyra. And he wasted all of the money she paid him. And when he ran out of the money, drinking ale in the taverns every night, he just deserted her, and she had to then get herself and her wagon to New York. It would not have been easy because there's not too much here in the way of a road for her to take. Lancaster Road to Lancaster, Pennsylvania was a very important road in these early times. But mostly all of the civilization, because of the mountains, and all of the roads, because of the mountains, were pretty much near the ocean. Now, the people knew, because of the Ohio Company and the 2 or 3 men that owned the Ohio Company, one of them was Lawrence Washington, and that's George Washington's half-brother. And so he had figured out that if they could come over here underneath Lake Erie, that there was beautiful farmland, but pretty hard to get there. But so that's what things looked like before the Revolutionary War. Then, I don't seem to have a number 3 sign. What's number 3, Charles?
So top.
Well, we'll just go on to number 4.
The Great Valley Road?
Pardon?
Is it the Great Valley Road?
Maybe. I have one that says the Great Valley Road. Do I have a Great Valley Road in my sign? Maybe if I pull it over farther? I pulled it over farther. Now I can see it.
There it is.
Okay, so here is the map of the 3 roads that I've talked about. The Great Valley Road, the Upper Road, and the Fall Line Road. Then the Wilderness Road was about the first highway that went west. And this, I'm probably telling this a little bit tilted my family's way, but Daniel Boone was a pioneer who loved to be out in the woods, and he had watched the deer, and he knew that they came through the mountains, and that there was a little track that they took through the mountains. And he knew that this area called Kentucky had been deeded by the king to the colony of Virginia and to the colony of Maryland and to the colony of somebody else. So the land there had been claimed by 3 different colonies, so the United States. So Daniel Boone loaded his family on horseback along with friends and took them through this gap in the mountains, which is now known as Cumberland Gap. And then they came up to Castle Rock, and beyond Castle Rock, they split up into many different forts. The 2 main forts are Harrodsburg and Bonesborough. And so that is the Wilderness Road, which went through Cumberland Gap. Now, other people wanted to go to Kentucky, but they mostly went over to the rivers and went on a river down into Ohio. And they called Ohio the Northwest Territory because it was as farthest west and as farthest north as they knew about. So, I definitely don't think of Ohio as being Northwest, but that's what they called it, and that's what they did. So any settlers that did go into Virginia went across that way to Ohio, went on rivers, and maybe you've seen movies where people were on the boats that took them into Ohio, or else they came into Kentucky by the Cumberland Gap. Now, eventually they were able to make that road wider, and as they made it wider, then they could bring wagons through. But the first settlers all had to come on horseback with pack horses and walking along beside the horses. They were really pioneers. So then, by this time, it's about time for the Revolutionary War. Well, it's time for the French and Indian War. And so General Braddock had his ideas about how to beat the British, how to beat the French. And so he knew he wanted to go to Fort Duquesne. And so he, the king, paid colonists to build a road as they went and take Governor Braddock to Fort Duquesne, of course, the French were smart enough to abandon it. Yes. Did you have a question? So the military roads of General Braddock and then Forbes Road were the first main roads that went westward, into western Pennsylvania, and then that puts them right close. Ohio would be about over here. So those were the first two roads that went west. So this is kind of the beginning. The military needs of our nation have determined in a large part what our road system was. Now, about after the Revolutionary War, a few years later, Thomas Jefferson becomes the third president of the United States. And he has a brilliant idea, and he talks Congress into it. They didn't quite follow through the way that the original plan was, but what they did was marvelous. They started in Baltimore, Maryland, and they built a road that went westward. And they called this the National Road, and it was the first federal highway. We went to a museum in Zanesville, someplace or another, about the National Road. And when we went to that museum, I did not know that my family had played a part of it. So I wasn't as interested as I would be if I went back again. But so my one family lived about here in Pennsylvania. And as the road crews built this road, and at first the idea was it would be 32 feet wide. And then they decided probably 16 feet. And then some places it was pretty hard, so they didn't even make it 16 feet. But it was a road that had trees moved out of the way, some leveling done, and it was marvelous because you could drive a horse and buggy or a wagon along this road. So when they got to Harris County, Pennsylvania, which was about here, my ancestor said, oh, this will be a good way to make a living. So he and his family joined the road crew, and they followed the road as they built the road all the way through Ohio and all the way through Indiana. And when they got just before Vandalia, Illinois, they stopped and became farmers. So that is exactly the story of how my Van Dyke family got from Pennsylvania to Illinois. And now that I know a little bit about the history of this national road, then I know where in Pennsylvania to look for records to find him. And that'll be one of my next genealogy searches, will be to find exactly where in this part of Pennsylvania he came from. But that was a pretty important part of the history of our nation. And that was the first main road that went east-west. Now, there was another marvelous way thing that happened so that people could get east-west. And this was the Erie Canal. And so here is Lake Ontario, and here is Lake Erie. And the Erie Canal was built along the river from about here. I couldn't get exactly where Palmyra was, but about here. And if you visit Palmyra today and you drive a little bit out of town, past the Martin Harris farm, you will get to the Erie Canal. And you can stand at the Erie Canal, and occasionally a boat will come through and they will change the things they have to change in order for the water level to rise enough that the boat can float a little bit down till it gets to the next block, and then they have to change the water again. And so that was a very important thing in Mormondom. You probably remember the story about Lucy Mack Smith and how she was with a group of saints on their way to Kirtland. and people lost faith and began to complain. And she said, okay, enough of this. We're gonna shape up and go. And they prayed and went and followed the Erie Canal until they got down here to Kirtland, Ohio. So that is another story of our history about traveling to the Northwest Territory or to Ohio. And then as time passed, there were additional roads too. But the number of people that followed the Erie Canal was very big. In the book, the fictional book, Work in the Glory, there's stories about the effect of the workmen on the Erie Canal on the Smith family. Now, way early, about the time that the church was formed, the a family decided to go to Oregon way early in the 1830s. And here is the map that they took on the Oregon Trail to Oregon. And this then became another very big road. And this is after the 1815 book, but following the Oregon Trail. Then, just after the Saints left Nauvoo, many of the brethren, 500 of the brethren, were recruited to go again with the military and serve as soldiers. And so here's a map, and it's not very big, but of what the Mormon Battalion did. They started at Council Bluffs and went down to finally made their way to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Then they went on over to San Diego and then Los Angeles, and then gradually made their way back to Utah. So that was an early route that many of our ancestors took, although they didn't take it to settle. Generally speaking, they didn't take it to settle. Then here's the map of the Mormon Trail. This is what many of our ancestors took from Council Bluffs, Iowa, and then on over to Utah. Many of our ancestors went back and forth multiple times, helping new converts make their way to Utah. And then in 1869, the railroad was finished to go through Utah, or to go across country, and then lots of settlers could go awfully easily. That made it an awful lot easier for people to be able to do that once that had happened. Now, when I got my DNA back, one of the things that showed up on my DNA is that it groups you by communities when possible. And one of my communities was people who went from Kentucky into Illinois. And there is a main river or main migration route, which I do not have a map to show because it's in those things that got lost, from Kentucky into Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. And so it groups me with the group of those people, even though in my mind, I didn't have very many of those. It does not, my DNA does not group me with the group of people that came on the Wilderness Road with Daniel Boone into Boonesboro and these areas. But all of my children that have had their DNA tested, it does show that they were with Daniel Boone in that community. And that used to kind of distress me until I finally researched a little bit on my husband's biological genealogy line, and his biological line shows that his family was in one of the Boone settlements in the early days. So my kids have more DNA from that group of people than I do. And because I had two main settlers, I'd always taken such pride. I'm a descendant of Daniel Boone. Well, my kids have more descendancy from Daniel Boone and family than I do. Now, do you see this picture, Rick, about where Harrodsburg is?
Yeah.
So Harrodsburg is right here on the Wilderness Road. So I think it very likely that your ancestors did follow the Wilderness Road into Harrodsburg. And I couldn't look it up because I had forgotten their name, and I didn't allow time to get in touch with you to look it up, the history of Harrodsburg, to see if I could find them. But I feel certain that that's how they got to Harrodsburg, is along that important road.
Yeah.
Now, many of our LDS ancestors came to Council Bluffs, Iowa. Oh dear, good, I didn't turn this off. Came to the United States, either through Independence, Missouri, or else more likely through Council Bluffs and Winter Quarters, Iowa. And Council Bluffs was kind of, well, both Winter Quarters and Council Bluffs were the towns and settlements that the Mormon colonies made, so that they had a stopping point, a gathering point for each succeeding group of pioneers that came across. How the rest of the states got settled is the history from probably Civil War times, mostly, until the early 1900s. That's what I really feel badly that I can't give you more of a history of. Maybe we should go back to those maps and have somebody tell us where their family was, and let's see if we can follow their family a little bit. Otherwise, it's going to be a very short lesson. Angel, do you have ancestors that were not Mormon pioneers?
Not really. I had one when I went to the pedigree chart. You can click on it and it shows, like, you can choose what country they were born in. So I looked on that and I had a Hannah Adams.
Okay.
And she joined the church in England, and then her family disowned her. And so she met this widower with 3 kids, and they got married right before New York on the boat.
Oh, how fun.
And so then they came west all the way to Utah from there. So that was kind of fun to see. So I thought when you looked at Family Search, if you could even find out where someone was born. And then I just read stories and memories I had no idea about from that.
Okay, so, and this is how Angel found this. She went to Tree. Probably you already all know this. She went to Tree. She went to Fan Chart. And under Fan Chart, she chose birth country. And so the birth, then it shows you, and it uses different colors for every person. So the fact that my United States family is all blue does not mean that your United States family is going to be blue. But you can, and the way that they know this is by where I listed the birth location. So this is not by DNA, this is strictly by birth country according to the information on Family Search. But you can see that most of my ancestors are from the United States, because in my record, United States is blue. Now, it looks like I have never recorded where Catherine Ann Van Dyke was born, and that I have never recorded where William A. Stewart was born. And so I should verify that and change it to United States. And then here, this is colonial place locations. This is Denmark. This is one place or another in the British Isles. And I thought that these were, these are British colonies too. But so most of my ancestry is blue. So Angel is saying that her one ancestor is not blue, but instead is whatever color England is for her.
It's pink.
Pink. Well, maybe mine's also pink. Okay. So that is how, what we're talking about when Angel says that. Nauvoo, back to that chart. And I have to make it bigger in order to be able to get everywhere I want to go. Well, I guess I can't, because I wanted to show on the map. But our ancestors pretty much that were in Nauvoo, for those of us that have LDS ancestors in Nauvoo, pretty much followed that Mormon trail straight out. Now, how they got to Nauvoo is different. My ancestors lived in Eastern Illinois and heard the gospel and moved to Nauvoo.
Nancy?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the Wilderness Road, how far, where did the Wilderness Road end? And what year? I couldn't tell what years that was.
Okay, I'm gonna read what is out of Bill Dollarhide's book.
Okay.
So he says the way west, 1775 to 1795, Daniel Boone's Wilderness Road was the route for thousands of settlers into Kentucky. But meanwhile, the Western Pennsylvania routes provided an overland access to the Ohio River and also then, to the Ohio River and then, or the Erie Canal and then down. After the Revolutionary War, these routes continued to increase. I think I read someplace that there were 30 by the Revolutionary War. There were 30,000 people who had crossed into Kentucky. Wow, that's before the Revolutionary War. That's a lot of people. I used to wonder why, one of the turning battles that turned the tide for the colonists to win the Revolutionary War was the Battle of Cowpens. And here's this little tiny town. Why in the world was Cowpens an important enough place that they would have a major battle in Cowpens? Well, the reason is that it was on the road. And so the colonist soldiers came down the road. The British soldiers got off the boats and started overland, and they met in Cowpens. And that's why the military has, or an example of why the military has decided so much of the roads in the United States. Okay, more questions.
Nancy?
Yes.
My family didn't join the church until my parents. So I've got some that are not as much LDS. And as I was looking at a lot of that, both my mom's family and my dad's family came from Pennsylvania. I have to look to see where the one town was in Pennsylvania that my mom's family came from. It's Bedford, Pennsylvania. But my father's family, as far as we can tell, started in Pennsylvania or in Philadelphia. And they ended up in Ohio. And then both of them did end up in Indiana along the way.
Okay.
And they, as far as we see, is my father's family from Philadelphia ended up in Ohio, starting pretty much when Ohio became a state in 1805. So that was pretty early. Yeah, that was early. They were very early.
So here's the bottom edge of Pennsylvania in this map.
Uh-huh.
And so they might have come on Braddock's Road over. That's very likely. It is not surprising that they were in Ohio and then Indiana. That's not surprising at all. What time frame did you say? You said 1805?
1805 for my father's family from Philadelphia to Ohio. And part of it, we haven't been able to tie them to it yet, but that was a part of Ohio that's a lot of the Revolutionary War.
Bounty lands?
Yeah, the bounty lands.
Okay.
We haven't been able to tie him to being in the war. So he might have gotten it from someone else, but
I have always known a little bit about bounty lands. The federal government wanted to give a pension to the Revolutionary soldiers, and they didn't have any money. But they hoped that they would eventually be able to do something with the land in Ohio. So instead of giving them pensions, they gave them bounty lands. And what that meant was for 5 cents an acre, you could buy land somewhere later, somewhere out west later. Now, that wasn't worth too much to a lot of the soldiers. So people would say to them, well, I think I would like to go west, so I'll pay you 10 cents an acre for your land, and if you'll give it to me. So they gave them, they'd make a deal, and then the person that wanted to go west could cash in on that certificate after he got to where he wanted to go. And the government then decided, oh, we better do something about this land. So they started establishing land offices. And in this book by Dollarhide, he tells about which land offices were established a little bit in what order. And so the very first ones, first there were 3. And so that was places where a lot of the soldiers or those who bought the bounty land certificates from the soldiers moved to. And one of them, I think, was in Vandalia, Illinois, at the end of the National Highway. And that National Highway went through Indiana. So what were the lines for the National Road? The National Road was built in 1818 to 1838. So your family might have gotten there before that. 1805 is earlier than 1818.
The ones that ended up in Indiana, I have to look to see when they actually went to Indiana. They were later, because my dad's family in Ohio stayed there for quite a while, and then they moved to Indiana. Trying to think when they did. Probably 30 or so years later, so more like 40 years later, so they might have been doing it. But they ended up north of the National Highway through Indiana, though. They were more in the north central part of the state.
Okay. Well, they did not travel on paved roads. They were very much pioneers. One of my families had been in Eastern Kentucky, and then they moved to Indiana and then to Eastern Illinois. And I always thought it was interesting that these 3 siblings had birth years way, way far apart, like 1806, 1811, and 1815. And I thought, that is just not usual for a pioneer family to go that many years between children. Then somebody else was researching in Tennessee, and their family was born in between those years. And come to find out, they were brothers. Half the family took the road east to Tennessee, and half the family took the road north to Indiana. and then on into Illinois. And that was why there were such big discrepancies or variances between when the children were born. And that sure made sense to me, because I'd always wondered, how could these two brothers that moved together and, you know, lived in the same communities, had such varying birth years? So it was because of half decided to take the road north and half decided to take the road south. Rose, I wished I could tell you more specifically about which road your family took, but it sounds to me like very likely your family took it in the time frame of this book. So if you want to borrow this book, I'll lend it to you.
That would be great. Be
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah, and it might not have specific answers for you, but it might have more specific answers for you than I've given.
Have you ever heard anything about the Stanger, people who followed Brother Stanger up into Wisconsin from Nauvoo?
No, I
I think-
haven't, but there are books. I saw books about it in the bookstore in the part of Nauvoo that is controlled by the Reorganite Church, which is now called Community of Christ.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And they have books about it there, and they might be listed. One of the collections that has been indexed that you can find through the card catalog on Family Search is about early reorganized church members, and they might be listed in that book. I thought that maybe we would find Rick Chestnut's ancestors in that group of people, and they are not. So they stayed in Iowa. They didn't go on to Wisconsin. They called that the Pineries in Wisconsin, and that is where the saints went on sort of service missions to get the wood for building Nauvoo and the temple.
All right. Well, I have a weird story, but so I grew up Methodist until my parents joined the church. I was 3 years old when they joined, but yeah, I mean, all the family was Methodist or, well, I forget what my mom's was. I can't think of it, but, so she said she had an aunt who swore there were no Mormons in their family. And doing family search probably about 10, 15 years ago, found out we had a great-great-great-grandfather in Nauvoo. The men died and the women all moved back east. But they came up through Michigan and that area. So I'm wondering if they went up with the Stanger group.
Wouldn't have to be Stangers. It could be other Reorganite members.
Yeah, so interesting.
Well, I think that'll be fun for you to find out more.
Yeah.
Nancy,
Uh-huh.
I just like to comment when I saw, it was interesting, we follow all these maps and we could follow our families across several places here, but anyway, the Oregon Trail, where it started there, it said Independence, Missouri. My sister lives a half a block from the site that there's a cemetery there, and it's just an open space, and all the houses are built around it, but it's kind of open. And there's a plaque that says that was a gathering place. And from there, they split and they went up the Oregon Trail, but they also went southwest down to the Santa Fe Trail. So
Okay.
I noticed you had that on that map, but according to that plaque, the Santa Fe Trail started there too, and went southwest. So like you said, a lot of people chose to go north, some chose to go south, but anyway, the people split, went different directions, just a half a block where she lives today. And I always take walks up to that site and think about it, But
Yeah.
And it's right on state line. It's right on state line on the southern part of Kansas City. And so right across the highway, you're in Kansas. And that was the wilderness. Right there was the step off into, that was all Indian territory. And anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. It was
That is interesting.
follow these maps. You know, it was great.
That
Well-
was probably created by the Mormon, the battalion that went down there. When they went down into Santa Fe and down to Mexico and along the border.
Yeah.
They built roads down there, so that was probably what that Santa Fe Trail would have turned into be.
Did they improve the roads, or did they lay it out?
Some of them they built. I know all the way from Santa Fe down into that little town in New Mexico. That they went right down the river from Santa Fe all the way down and built a road down through there. So that was all built by the Mormon pioneers, and then all the way across the border and clear the war ended down there, and so part of the border was made by the battalion that marched straight to San Diego or across the desert, and some of those areas were what they actually made the border from.
Wow, I didn't know that. Interesting. The roles that we played in history. When I visited my daughter and son-in-law, when maybe my son too, I don't remember that, when they were stationed at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, in the Army. Fort Leavenworth is very historic because it was such an old Army place. And there is a marker in the middle of the sidewalk in honor of the Mormon Battalion from when they were at Fort Leavenworth to get Army training so that they would be equipped militarily to keep going on that march.
Yeah, they were recruited, by the way, to go assist in the invasion of Mexico by, I think it was General Grant that went down and actually fought battles and went clear down into Mexico, almost to Mexico City. And when they got down there and completely destroyed the armies of the Mexican government, and then they gave up, and that was about the time the Mormon Battalion got there at Las Cruces. Yeah, that's a.
Oh, at Las Cruces. Oh, well, my son was also stationed in the Army in Las Cruces.
Yeah, so they got right there and then started. The war was over, so then they just built roads and stuff straight west. So
Las Cruces is very close to the border.
right. Yeah.
One day, my daughter-in-law, when we were there, said, "What do you want to do tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to go revisit the places where I lived in El Paso when I was in high school." And so we drove to El Paso from Las Cruces. And I kept saying, "Oh, I didn't remember that I grew up in such poverty. That look, right there across the river, there is such horrible poverty." And after a while, we came to realize that across the river was Mexico.
Yeah.
And that's why there was such poverty. It wasn't in the United States. It was in Mexico.
Yeah.
But this was like 10 years ago.
I have a cousin that has a house in Las Cruces, and you can see the river from his patio.
Yeah. So that's where the border is between New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico.
Yeah.
So see, this is a history lesson. All of it is history. I think if I were to go back to school again, and if I was young and I wasn't studying nursing, I think I'd study history, because I have been fascinating in how history has affected my family. And the other thing that I am thoroughly interested in, although it's kind of a strange thing to be interested in, is battles. I have been very interested, particularly as we began to travel places with our son and son-in-law, who are both military, to go to battlefields and see places where our country began and grew. And you know, that's something to be on the Concord Bridge, and it's something to be where George Washington crossed the Delaware, and it's immensely impactful to go to Gettysburg. I just have enjoyed being where military history was made. Another very impactful place to go is France, where we invaded France during World War II, and to see the cliffs that the soldiers tried to scale, and the beaches where the Germans, from their great big concrete, whatever they were called, embankments. It just gives you an appreciation for your history. So being there makes a difference. It's very interesting to drive the streets of Boonesboro and kind of stop and think about what happened there. A history more along the Mormon travel route is when we went to Nauvoo before the temple was rebuilt. And the temple was rebuilt where the water tower, just a few feet from where the Nauvoo water tower was. And we found out where our Gaiman ancestors had lived in Nauvoo. And we went and stood at the fence of the backyard of that home and looked at the water tower and imagined in my mind how my Gaiman ancestors felt. Here, just imagine, here she is hanging out her wash to dry in the backyard and looking towards the temple and watching it grow day by day. And what feelings she must have had as knowing that the temple, they were going to have a temple, they were building their temple. Such a marvelous feeling. And yet, at the same time, did I feel about the same when we would take walks on Sunday afternoons around the city center temple and watch its excavation and then watch its rebirth and its rebuilding? And as we followed on the internet blogs about the reconstruction of the city center temple, we had those same kind of feelings as I think Marianne Gaiman had when she looked at the temple grow in Nauvoo. Just like every now and again we take a ride over to Saratoga Springs and watch the temple there growing. Of course, we don't have quite the same affiliation with it, and the big fences keep you farther away in Saratoga Springs than the city center does. But, and of course, having gone to state conference for decades in the city center, in the original tabernacle. So all of these things are ways that we find a connection with our relatives and that we learn to love them. Any further questions or comments? I think I bore my testimony with my last comments there about our temple. How blessed we are. And I am sure that the number of names that are being researched and prepared for the temple are going to keep the temples very busy when they are reopened. We will have a lot of temple work just in our hands waiting. We were blessed to go to the temple this week, and I have one card left in my collection of family names, just one card left. And we were able to get the others done on on Friday, and it was really a blessing to be able to go to the temple. John, would you say our closing prayer?
You said-
Wait, John, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Cynthia, because she hasn't been here and had the opportunity as many times. So Cynthia, could you do that? Cindy, did you hear me?
No. Sorry.
You didn't hear me?
No.
What, I was asking, would you say the closing prayer?
Oh. Okay. Sorry, I was brushing my teeth.
Oh, well, I'm glad you were able to listen while you brushed your teeth.
Okay. Our dear Father in heaven, we're grateful for this opportunity to learn more about family history and how so many things have influenced our ancestors and ourselves. And we're thankful for everything that is brought together to help us find our family and to be able to trace back through the ages. We ask that thou would bless that the temples would be able to be reopened and we'll be able to do their temple work, and we ask for these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, we're on vacation now. No more classes until New Year's.
Okay, thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
That was so
And so if you have a specific class that you'd like to have, tell me now. We'll save it for January.
I just wanted that class on how to prepare for Roots Tech.
Oh, well, I don't know that one. That would be like this one. I wouldn't have taught it before. I'll have to kind of brush up.
Yeah.
The thing about Roots Tech that I have not enjoyed is the crowds. I'll be able to avoid that this year.
Yeah.
And I won't have to stand in line for my lunch.
It's true.
So I think that the things that I have not enjoyed about Roots Tech will not be a factor this year.
Maybe I could go through some of the presenters and give an idea of who I know is good.
Oh, okay.
That's a great idea.
So do we want to do this early January, like our first week in January?
Maybe not the first week. You could do it introductory, but sometime in January.
Yeah.
Be good.
Does that sound good, Angel?
Yeah, or the beginning of February, because I've never gone to Roots Tech.
Well, do you know what my favorite part about Roots Tech is?
What?
The keynote speakers.
Okay.
And I think, well, I didn't really learn anything about genealogy techniques or researching techniques from the presenters, but that has been my favorite part is the keynote speakers.
Okay.
So, okay, I love you all.
okay.
All right.
Thank you.
See you in January.
Everybody.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Nancy.
Yeah.
Rose,
Go up. Sure.
I wish I could have heard the whole thing. This is the one thing I really needed. But my friend called me because she needed some genealogy help.
Yeah.
I can't hear
Nancy,
you, Nancy. You're muted.
yeah, Nancy, did that book have any family names in it? Or was it just talking about the highways and byways?
just talking about the highways and the byways and what was behind them.
Right, okay.
Would have to be longer to have any names. Even I have a book on the Great Valley Road, and it doesn't tell any names.
I gotta go feed my dog. I forgot to feed her.
Oh, go feed him.
I'll see you guys later. Thank you.
Are we
Happy
gonna-
Thanksgiving.
Are we gonna have a meeting?
I hadn't planned on it tonight.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
going to take a week from Monday vacation day, and I'm going to work on my calling all that day. So be prepared to be hearing from me.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Oh, you too. You too.